firmly where I'm seated right now, about exactly the time this meeting is scheduled to end. So I will. I have remotely chaired meetings before. I think with your indulgence and your latitude for my raspy throat, I will. I'll gavel this meeting in. Call to order. How you doing, Brittany?
Yeah.
I would love to cede the gavel to you, Brittany, if you would so desire.
Yeah, happy to do it. Appreciate it.
Very good. Then at this point, I'll mute myself, and Brittany, you have the gavel.
Excellent. Thanks. Are you guys hearing the construction in the background of my audio? Okay, good. I was hoping my headphones would make sure that was out of there. Kate, it's a little hard to see everybody in the room. I assume we have quorum.
I hear you. Let me just look through.
We do for this meeting, yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. Yep, I agree.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, let's, first thing on the agenda is introductions. So I can go ahead and call folks on Zoom, and then Kate, I might pass it to you to do so for the folks in person. So Brittany Quick Corner, Eugene Chamber, I sit in the business seat. I am the chair this year. Commissioner Farr?
Pat Farr, I'm one of the co-vice chairs, and Chair Quick Warner, I represent the Board of County Commissioners, and I used to be called North Eugene, but now I'm Alvador, Fernridge Dam, and parts of Eugene that don't include Harlow Road. So that being said, before you came, Brittany, I'd heard that we were supposed to have an introductory question just to get everybody to break the ice, and I had one ready to go.
Oh, excellent. Go for it.
No, I'm kidding. I was going to say, who's your favorite English football team? But that's all from me. I'm going to go back on mute.
Chris?
Chris McAllister, lived experience seat, vice chair on homelessness for the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And are we doing the question, or do we want to revisit that? It's to help with our conversation point next that's coming up. It's, what does the PHB mean to you?
Excellent. Let's do that. Go for it, Chris. What's the PHB mean to you?
The PHB means a vehicle for positive change across the county with meeting the individual needs of every district.
Thanks. Commissioner Farr, I'll toss it back to you for our icebreaker question. What's the PHB mean to you?
PHB is it means a lot to me. As the CFC and the CAA are statutory responsibilities and requirements. It is an adjunct to Human Services Commission and other things that we do as counties and jurisdictions to make certain that we're addressing all of the needs of, particularly surrounding housing and HUD and its requirements, but the needs of people in our community.
Excellent, thanks. I see Mayor Van Gordon popped on. We're doing introductions, and our icebreaker question is, what is the PHB mean to you?
Ooh. You're going to have to read. I'm still working on the audio piece. So Sean Van Gordon, Mayor of Springfield, could you read me the icebreaker question again?
Yeah, sure. What does the PHB mean to you?
Are we talking, emotionally, spiritually, like or is it just an open-ended question?
Open-ended, however you want to interpret.
So one of the most important things I think that people that people see is that modern problems are super complex. They move very quickly. They're detailed. They're hard to understand. Like, that's just what living in the 21st century is. And one of the things that groups that successfully navigate this modern complex problems are people that are, is collaborative and sort of when you get everybody in the same page, right? So when I think about the PHB, I think of this sort of opportunity that I see it to actually get the service providers, to get the political leaders to get the community roughly on the same page, which is really the textbook way that you have to approach complicated problems. And the way I think of it is aspirational in nature. You know, I see us sort of struggling around the identity and reinventing ourselves. But what keeps me showing up is not only the importance of this as a problem, but the fact that we actually have everybody that can do something about it in the room.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I see Mayor Venice, at least. It looks like Matthias is there too. I'll let you go, Mayor Venice.
I just took a bite of cracker.
No.
I was going to warn you, Lucy. They've got icebreakers this time around.
How about Matthias? Would you like to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
go.
Matthias.
Matthias Smith, youth representative, and I don't know. PHB what the PHB means to me is like, I think it's good that we have a body that is able to address, at the very least, address the problems in the community revolving around homelessness and provide possible solutions to it. So.
Okay, now I can jump in and I can say, first and foremost, today it means a free lunch. So sorry to you guys who are online because you missed it. I mean, I will echo Sean's comments that it has, I mean, I've served since I took office in 2017, and so it's been an important place of building relationships and understanding issues and understanding each other. But I do think the issue on the table is, what does the PHB actually mean as we look at reorganization? So I'm actually not going to jump in and start that conversation just yet.
Thank you. So I guess I'll circle back around. For me, you know, joining the PHB, my hope and aspiration for the body as I got to know it, or my understanding was, it was sort of the place where collective impact work around homelessness and poverty could happen. And I think my hope for it is that it's the truest form of collective impact, where really everybody at the table feels like they own something in this, and that they have a responsibility and an opportunity to contribute to the solutions. I also think it's one of our very few opportunities to really have transparency and accountability to the goals that we've set for ourselves and to the public. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, is maintaining that transparency and accountability, because I think it's the way that we build trust and hope back in the community that we can actually overcome these challenges. So that would be my answer. All right, well, thank you everyone for entertaining a little icebreaker today. So we have our consent agenda that we'll start with. We've got minutes from the March 16th executive committee meeting, financial statements in the dashboard that Kate's been putting together for us, and then approval of Emily Carr as the family provider for the coordinated entry stakeholder committee. So I'll entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
I'll motion.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion items on here you want more clarification about, or? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor passing the consent agenda as listed, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent, that will pass as listed. Okay, next up we have a vote scheduled, the coordinated waitlist inactive status policy, and Catherine Ryan, I believe, is going to chat a little bit about that.
Hi there. Yeah, so this is coming out of the coordinated entry committee, and James is on vacation, so you have me today. So this is really, as we're updating coordinated entry process, part of what we're trying to do is get kind of more of our practices and things written into like formal official policies. So that is part of what's happening here, and it also provides the opportunity to discuss a little bit and make sure that we are doing what we think we're doing. And so, yeah, I think it's on page 12 in the packet, 12 or 13. So the idea for this one is as folks come to the top of the central wait list, the outreach team at the county starts trying to find them and work with them to kind of get them ready so that when they get referred to a program, they've got their documents, we know where to find them, sort of it makes a smooth transition to the housing program. And so what this does is it lays out basically how many attempts and kind of what type of outreach needs to happen to a household in that situation before they would be basically removed from the list because we can't find them. So it's really trying to just kind of streamline who is on the list, decrease the amount of time from like referrals happening to folks getting into housing, just kind of some process flow pieces. The committee did have a little bit of discussion around what you see listed under those 1, 2, and 3, just in terms of kind of trying to balance like making sure that there is like appropriate outreach happening through the channels that are available, but also not like wasting staff time if they're trying to call a phone number that isn't in service and just doing it, check a box saying they called 3 times or whatever that looks like. So we kind of laid out a couple different ways that they would be expected to reach out and sort of said, you know, between these different methods, this is sort of the expectation of trying to reach out. I think that's it for explanation. Happy to try and answer any questions if there are any.
Looks like folks are just looking over it a little bit deeper before we take a vote. Any questions? Feel free to pop on and ask.
Brittany, I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
And for 2 weeks, why is 2 weeks the sort of magic number?
I think I'm trying to remember back to the conversation. I mean, I think some of it is that it's sort of that balance that I was just talking about of it's like giving enough time to kind of, you know, leave a message on a phone or a message line or get in touch with a caseworker, like, and then have that person be able to like follow back and loop up, but also not taking so long that folks are like that we're just sort of sitting there waiting and then not being able to connect with folks. So I think it seems like that's kind of the current practice. I saw Peter's question in the chat. I don't know kind of what the you know, the numbers are in terms of like who, you know, it's like of the folks that end up getting reached, you know, how many of those do we get a hold of in the first week or the second week, and what that looks like. But I think the representatives on the committee, you know, who sort of are a combination of outreach, housing programs, sort of all of those different parts of the system, felt like the 2-week window was appropriate.
Yeah, just wondering if there's, from people with lived experience, if that feels like the right amount of time, if they're in an uncertain situation, how quickly, you know, I realize there's a lot of ways for that information to slip through. So I don't have an objection to it. I'm just curious about whether that's just the way it's always been, or is there any reason to sort of reevaluate that time frame?
And I would say there wasn't, in the discussion in the meeting, the 2-week part, actually, there wasn't really any questions or feedback. It was more around kind of how much like active outreach and through what channels is happening during that time was where we spent more time talking about and did make adjustments to the kind of initial proposed policy.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say,
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
reading this new policy, I think 2 weeks is a pretty decent amount of time because most people are accessing resources in that amount of time.
Okay.
So if they're accessing the resources that are on HMIS, I feel 2 weeks should be fine.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious about the decision to drop them completely and do a new front door assessment versus like just moving them back down the list. And I don't know the logistics of the system well enough. So I don't know if that was part of the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is it's like there's a group of folks who despite all best efforts, like they're just not going to be able to find, you know, like there's sort of a category of those folks. I think some of it too is the timing. So because, so when someone gets a front door assessment, they go on the list for 6 months. They're
Right.
on there for 6 months. And so the period of time, like from when someone goes on the list, when they actually get referred to a program, right? For some people that never happens. For some people, it may be within a couple months. So I think some of it is aligned with the fact that if they do get, you know, sort of dropped off, yes, it may be sooner than the 6-month window, but it's probably not going to be, you know, it's not like they're off of it. They would have been on it indefinitely and then they're off of it forever. If they come back into services, someone could look and see, oh, you are not, you know, you don't have an active front door anymore. And there's some other part of the coordinated entry conversations we're having is around sort of that, like that 6-month window, whether someone should need to do a full reassessment at that time. Like some of that is kind of some of the future state work we're talking about too.
Okay, excellent. Chris?
Thank you. The mute button doesn't always be kind. I like the 2 week. I would like to maybe even see it be a month but be able to have it referred to by field workers to ask for that extension. Because when we've had to deal with county referrals for our shelters, we're usually given 72 hours. So 72 hours to find somebody is a lot harder than 2 weeks. And so that's where I see the growth difference here. It's just knowing both, and also sometimes we have people who will start the process and then need another because they're traumatized. They need to have another time to be able to finish and complete some of the FDA stuff that's with some of the CWL stuff. So I'm open to having a additional window or extension so we can close out. Someone gets picked up, taken to jail due to a ban enforcement. They aren't reachable. They can't use their one phone call to finish this, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like there to be some maneuverability now that we're having a crackdown on municipalities, on our people.
I think, Chris, to one of the pieces that is in here is that they are bringing, James is bringing these folks up to the street outreach case conferencing meeting. So those are all of the outreach teams. That's one of the channels, is to say, hey, this person's up. Does anybody know, you know, where they are, how we can get a hold of them? So there's some coordination there as well.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that direct response. I attend those meetings as well. And sometimes we are looking for people for months. Yeah. And just because we all are looking for them doesn't mean that they are able to finish their process in this. And I want to make sure that we hold beds for stuff. Because again, we're trying to influence and correct the system. I'm still getting letters from dead people who just came up on the list. So
I think the other piece with this is just to balance. There's a real increased push around utilizing the available programmatic beds that exist. And the longer that something is held, of course, the longer the utilization is not at the highest level possible. And that if there is someone who is known, you know, even in case conferencing, if the outreach provider says, yeah, I think I know where this person is, or I want to check here or there, it doesn't then automatically close it down at 2 weeks. It's, you know, let's continue to work through this path and see if we can find that person. And if not, then, you know, 2 weeks is over and then we'll be able to move on. But if there's a path to try to figure out where this person is, then they won't automatically be shut down within the 2 weeks. And the majority of folks are identified, you know, within that 72-hour period, simply because of HMIS. And that you can go in there and you can look and see, like, oh gosh, they went into, you know, the Lindholm Center 2 days ago. And so being able to go there. So it is much more rare that you get to that 2 week mark with folks. And we can look at the specific data, but it's definitely rare and more common for people who have higher needs, which also those folks, staff are starting to work with them far earlier than when the clock starts ticking. In that, the next person on the list, they'll start looking for them, months ahead in order to start getting all the paperwork, in place and helping to prepare them to be able to go into housing.
Mayor Van Gordon?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One comment, and I know, Chris, you just brought up that, there's a lot of conversations around camping going on right now. I just would caution everybody's in the middle of making these ordinances to make sure they're putting out the right information about what's actually going on and why and how, right? About, changes to meet the Martin v. Boise. Because it's going to be a little bit of a charged conversation if we put out the wrong information about it. Now, the other thing, I guess the question that I had about the policy is I keep sort of hearing utilization come up, and I keep hearing, hey, maybe we can't find people. What is it? I didn't read a place where if for some reason somebody's struggling to find me, like I've been passed up 2 or 3 times, maybe we start further ahead of time, like maybe there's a more specialized path, right? Like the way the policy's written, somebody could get lost on this, correct?
Can you maybe restate your question for me?
Yeah, so if you can't contact me, right? And then and you can't find a provider who knows me, and the street outreach teams know me, right? Like, and we think you exist, is somebody in need, you could fall off, like you could keep, when your name comes up to the top of the list, right? You could keep basically falling to the bottom of the list, right?
I think rather than moving someone to the bottom, and this is really hard to picture when you've never seen the list. So I apologize. Like, picture
no, that's really perfectly okay.
For me, picture a really big spreadsheet that's sorted by how a vulnerability score, essentially.
Right.
If we can't find you, we've tried many times to find you and we're just not able to, let's move to the next person in the list and take you off of the list for now. Next time we find you, let's put you back on the list. I'm assuming your vulnerability score is going to be very similar because your situation has probably not changed. You'll head right back to the top of the list. It's not a first come, first served.
Okay.
It's who is most vulnerable. Okay. And, a piece of this, let's try to be flexible too. I'm aware a lot of times when we're doing sort of a renewal for a front door, the way HMIS and that system works is it'll show the assessor the last time those questions were asked, what the answers were. I bet you most of them are the same. Mm-hmm. We can have a more casual conversation and just say, hey, actually you were on the list 3 months ago, then we couldn't find you. Really, what's changed in the last 3 months? Let's update those, and it might not be an hour-long conversation.
So let me try repeating it back to you to see if that, so if I'm on the top of the list, you can't find me, right? You're going to drop me down. But the next time I hit a case outreach person, they know that we're looking for me, a service, a care coordinator. Mm-hmm. And if they make active content, assuming that I'm in the same sort of place I previously was, I'm going to kind of get bumped back to the top of the list to be served now that we can find me, right?
My understanding of the policy is actually we're going to remove you if we can't find you. Let's stop calling you every time because you'll just remain at the top. We're not going to change your vulnerability score.
Okay.
We'll just take you off the list for now. Should we find you again, we'll put you back on the list. And based on your vulnerability at the time we find you again, that's where you'll be next time.
Okay, so then my one piece of, I'm fine with the policy going forward. These things are hard to craft, right? So extra credit for people who've worked their way through it. My one ask would be just to sort of track what's happening with the people that fall off the list. Yeah. When you think about how systems work, right? Especially the first time around, you really can have, kind of create a hole where folks are falling out the bottom, and you may have to make an adjustment. And if we have to make an adjustment 6 months from now, I'm good with it. But as long as somebody's sort of tracking those exceptions to go, okay, what happens when we're pulling folks off the list? Yeah, I'm good with it.
I'm seeing Chris's comment about Eugene sweeps of 3 hours led to a 4-week delay. So it is interesting to know how the landscape is currently being experienced by folks as they are moved from a familiar campsite, lost to follow up.
Yeah, a lot of that contact information comes from HMIS, and sometimes it's not a phone number, it's an intersection or a park.
Right.
And so when folks move, it is harder to find them again. Case conferencing has helped a lot. And so has, you know, in the 3-ish years I've been here, we have so much more funding and we have so many more outreach teams than we did. And so HMIS has become so much more of a resource because folks are much more likely to have pinged off of a service like Matthias was talking about. Yeah. Probably someone has seen somebody in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, Chris.
I support this ordinance, this item. I would like to give a charge to the committee to maybe revisit, if we pass this today, that we explored Mayor Van Gordon's concepts about being less and having someone's highest vulnerability frozen to hold the space when they return. Because of the fact that I know someone who's had 3 different FDAs in a year, and they all have different scores based off of how much she trusted the actual person doing the screening, and she was eligible for the NEL the first time, not eligible for the NEL the second time, eligible for MLK Commons the third time. And so we need to have some kind of continuity, or at least hold people's most vulnerable space when we're reintegrating. And I'd like to see metrics around what's the best practice way to do that.
And I think there are other parts of the conversation around system improvements that are going to address some of those pieces, Chris, in terms of like a little more kind of like the idea of having a highly trained team of assessors who, rather it being like 0.1 FTE of someone's job that they do, looking more directly at resource matching to folks, and like not just like, well, this is the resource that's available and that's the top person, but really thinking about and understanding like, what is that person's needs, what are they interested in, so I think that some of those other system change pieces that we're working towards are going to address some of those pieces at least.
So I want to be sensitive. Peter made a great comment in the chat, just feeling like if we had data, that this might be an easier decision. Feels pretty consequential to make a decision like this without a little bit more data. So I don't know, Catherine, if you feel like that data exists and maybe we need to pause and wait to see it, or if we feel like we want to move forward with this policy. His recommendation was a month. Not being a part of those committee discussions, I don't know what the debate was about how you landed on 2 weeks, if there was data that influenced that 2-week mark, or if it was kind of like, well, we just have to pick something and move forward with it. So I'm open to folks feeling about if we want to alter the policy, move forward with it as is, or wait to collect some data before passing the policy.
I would say, I think that Carly probably has a better idea, of sort of what kind of data we might be able to pull or track on this. In the discussion in the committee, I think the sense was like, if there's no, kind of to Kate's point too, like if there's no leads for getting to somebody by the end of 2 weeks of like pretty aggressively, trying to find them, that the likelihood of being connected with them sort of in another week or even another 2 weeks is pretty small. So I think, that was kind of, I think, why folks felt comfortable with the 2 week, again, sort of anecdotally based on their experience.
Okay, thanks. Sean?
I'm fine moving forward here. We're more sure than we are not, right? Like, and, there's no sense in, bringing it back for another conversation. If people collect data as far as, and learn a little bit more about it in practice, they'll know in 6 months or so whether or not we need to take another look at it.
Okay, then I propose a motion, if you all are entertained. I'll move to pass this policy as is and ensure that we bring back a conversation in 6 months with some more data about how and if this policy impacted things one way or the other. Does that feel fair?
Yes. Excellent. I'll second that. That's Lucy speaking.
Thanks, Mayor Venice. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, excellent. So Kate, if it's good with you, if you or your staff could make a note to figure out how we can get that data back in 6 months or so we can evaluate.
Yeah, and I also just want to mention regarding the policy that the intention and reason behind this was simply that the efforts around identifying someone needed to be stronger. Not necessarily that the time frame was of a concern, but that it needed to be really clear what efforts an entity needed to go through in order to identify someone and get to the point where they deem that this person has not been able to be found. And so one of the strengths of this policy is we hope that more people will be identified because there's more outreach that's being requested related to that individual. So we'll be able to, I hope, be able to see some changes as a result.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. Appreciate that. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. It was a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but it's a good discussion and an important policy for us to have our heads on straight. So, okay, we're going to move on to a conversation about the work that's happening right now, reimagining the HSC and PHB. We have a consultant that the county hired a handful of months ago in a process that's been ongoing for the last couple, and wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into some of the structures that have been proposed to this point. And my hope is that we can have opportunity for some discussion here as well, because I know Chris and Commissioner Farr and I represent this PHB body in the discussion about these, and I am feeling a little bit like I don't have enough information about how other folks on the PHB are feeling. So I appreciate the opportunity. So Kate, go ahead.
So I want to make sure that you have time to be able to have these conversations. So I think I'm just going to guide everyone to page 15 in the packet. And like Brittany mentioned, the county has been working with a contractor called Uncommon Solutions, who had done individualized conversations to understand strengths and challenges and unmet needs related to the Human Services Commission, as well as the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And from those conversations, there had been options developed for the two bodies to consider around, what might restructuring look like. And those options were built from the knowledge and understanding of Uncommon Solutions, as well as Lane County staff, and then also research around what structures exist today around community action agencies, continuum of care, collaborative applicant agencies, and also interjurisdictional entities. And so on page 15, you have a draft decision-making framework. And that is kind of just an opportunity to look at things. Let me see if I'm getting this correct. I'm hoping that you can see a PowerPoint now with structural options. And the decision-making framework has 4 different components that we're encouraging folks to look through when they think through the options. One being, does it meet the external requirements of being a continuum of care as well as a community action agency? Will it help increase the sustainability of whatever structures are resulted from this process moving forward? Will it help increase the overall commitment to the stated goals? And so you've got community action focused on reducing the number of people who are in poverty, continuum of care focused on reducing the number of people who are houseless. And then you have the Human Services Commission, who is really focused on coordinating, planning, and collaboration around supporting our overall community, and particularly those who are low income. And then lastly, looking at operational efficiencies. And so does whatever the restructuring looks like, clarify roles further? Does it reduce redundancies? Does it streamline meetings? Does it give greater transparency and meaning to the public about what is happening among all these different groups? And so the options that had been proposed are in page 16, 17, 18, 19 of your packet. And like Chair Quick-Warner mentioned, a group of the HSC and PHB chairs came together and took a look at those 5 options, and themselves felt like the first 2 options that I'll share were of greatest interest. However, that wasn't the end all be all. I think that they are very interested in the general community's feedback. And so in order to achieve that, especially the feedback among PHB and HSC members, there's going to be a survey sent out to all the members in the next few days. And that survey is going to ask for folks to think about each of the options and then kind of score them based on those decision-making frameworks, as well as just, which one do you prefer, period. And that'll be a great opportunity to kind of pull together and take a look, does the preference of the general PHB HSC members, does it match the chair's preferences? And then we'll bring that information back to the chair's group in order to continue that conversation as to what the next step is. So you have 5 options, and one is what we're calling a responsibility shift, where basically the piece of community action that currently sits within the Poverty and Homelessness Board would move over to the Human Services Commission. And that HSC group would then reorganize into a tripartite board, where a third would be elected officials, a third would be community members, and a third would be people who are houseless. Are you able to see this? No?
No, I don't see it on screen. I thought I was sharing. So if you're sharing out, I'm not sure what's happening.
Okay.
We can see something via Zoom.
Oh, you can. Thank you. Okay. All right. And so the biggest change here would be that the Homelessness Advisory Board would have a singular focus of reducing houselessness. And then the Human Services Commission would adopt the requirements around being a community action board and focus on reducing the number of people in poverty while having the interjurisdictional collaboration and planning efforts among the participating jurisdictions. And so if you see questions pop up, feel free to let me know.
So,
I am not sharing my screen.
So,
okay.
So I do have questions.
Sure.
But I don't know if you want to go through all of these, or how do you want to have this conversation? I have sort of overarching questions, but I don't want to interrupt your presentation.
I'll go through them and then we'll talk. Perfect. And I'll also say that there was a deeper dive. So I apologize for folks who were there this morning. You're hearing the similar things. There's also another one tomorrow. And so we can continue this conversation. The next option is around keeping the same structure that exists today of the Poverty and Homelessness Board and then the Human Services Commission, but working to clarify each role of the entities, and then updating the organizing documents to make sure that it's memorializing not only the intention of the bodies, but also the practices of the bodies, so that it's more accurate to what is happening. There's certainly been a stray away from the founding documents during COVID. And so there are definitely ways that alignment can come into place much more strongly. The third option is a merger. And so seeing the Poverty and Homelessness Board and the Human Services Commission come together into one body. It is a rather simplistic approach, and one that may be more simple to communicate to the broader public, particularly if you're encouraging someone to get involved. There's one meeting to go to, and that meeting then has its own work groups. The challenges of the merger is that there's many requirements that play into both the Poverty and Homelessness Board and then also the Human Services Commission that may be difficult, in just one group to manage. The next option is similar to option 2, but it moves the community action part over to the Human Services Commission and changes it to an advisory board as opposed to an interjurisdictional body. And so what it does is it takes away that interjurisdictional focus that certainly has numerous strengths to it, and also provides that singular focus for the Homelessness Advisory Board. The Community Action Advisory Board would need to have that tripartite board requirement met, and would also, potentially lead to the loss of, all the agreements around the interjurisdictional aspect of the Human Services Commission.
We do have a chat question.
Sure.
And I missed the first. I see there's 2. I missed the first one, but there is a second one.
Oh,
People said they see it. What do you mean by it strays away?
Oh, I think simply that if we were to pull up the charter, there wouldn't be complete alignment between what's happening today and what the charter says. And Chris, fair point. I recognize there, COVID was not the only challenge that these groups have faced. So that was a quick review of the different options. There's much more information in the packet. And if you're interested in an even deeper dive.
Here's option 5 though.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Option 5 is moving the Poverty and Homelessness Board as well as the Human Services Commission out to a non-governmental organization, where it could either be, a private 501c3 entity, or this morning we were talking about how it could be some type of, a quasi-governmental entity where, even staff still remain county staff, for example. Some of the pros of that is it is new and different. And there are some communities that are moving in this direction. There's also communities that are moving in the opposite direction. It may lead to less political engagement, which certainly has its own pros and cons. It may also allow for more philanthropic dollars to be brought in around houselessness. Around the cons, philanthropic dollars could be brought in regardless, both to specific agencies as well as kind of systemic efforts. It is administratively expensive, particularly because a complete kind of governmental infrastructure would be needed around programmatic expertise, fiscal and contracting expertise. There isn't necessarily an heir apparent in the community to be able to do this broad scope of work. And any type of transition like this, on average, takes somewhere between 2 to 4 years to really start moving. And in the first few years is very expensive because often you have to run two kind of coordinating entities at the same time in order to make that transition, because contracts, for example, continue and need to be supported in many different ways. So a number of different options on the table. And again, you've got those in your packet. There is a deeper dive tomorrow from 1:30 to 2:30 tomorrow afternoon, if you're interested in that. And the survey should come out in the next few days. So I know you wanted to have a conversation, Brittany, so I'll pass it over to you.
Muted here. Yeah, Mayor Venice, you had mentioned that you had some questions or thoughts. I feel like now's the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So I have some overarching questions first and then maybe some specifics. So the overarching question is, who is actually going to make the decision at the end of the day on this?
So we're looking to the chairs of the groups to make a decision and then to move it forward to their bodies to make an official approval.
So move it forward to the respective HSC and PHB bodies.
Correct. And then once that's been done, then with the continuum of care, and so Poverty and Homelessness Board in general, it is a body of the Board of County Commissioners. And so whatever the recommendation is would then need to go to the Board of County Commissioners.
Right. Okay. And then the second question is, this is a fairly concise, brief description of what these different options are like. So I didn't go to the event this morning, and I don't know if that's it's a deeper dive into what this would actually look like. It's a little hard for me looking at this to really get it, what's going to happen. And then the second question I related to that is, when you are going out for insight, is it just that people will pick between these 5 options, or could these be modified based on what you're hearing back? Like if people say we want 1, but we want some modification, is there a 1A, which is a slightly revised option? I'm just kind of wondering, how much, do we just have 5 choices, or is it more open than that?
So in the survey, there are kind of open notes to share. And so if there's a modification suggestion, feel free to add that in to the survey. And again, we'll provide that information back to the chairs to decide kind of what the next step would look like.
So if I asked you, and this is putting you on the spot, or maybe anybody who's participated in this, if I asked you in 2 sentences, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And how does each of these options solve it? Like, that's what I want to know.
I'll jump in and say I think that's what I struggled with as well. That was the question I asked in the chairs meeting that we had, and unfortunately I feel like we haven't actually gone much deeper than the presentation, like identifying the pros and cons and like what the actual structure will look like. I don't know that we've had an opportunity for like in-depth discussion and talking through each model. I'm hoping maybe that's where some of the survey response data will be. I know that we added the couple presentations to this morning and tomorrow to try to at least get more information to folks before they did the survey. But I'll just be totally honest and transparent. That's been one of my concerns, is that we haven't actually got to have in-depth discussion about each of these different options. We sort of weeded it down pretty quickly in the last meeting and then talked a little bit more, but so I'll just add that is a concern that I'm a little fuzzy myself on the process of like when or if that in-depth discussion will happen with the committee. Or Kate, in your opinion, if that really was happening with the consultant and the staff to get us to this point, I think that's fair too, just understanding that better. I saw Chris in the chat and he said maybe he had a direct response too.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm lukewarm on this process. However, this meeting today was where we as PHB, with our opening question about what does the PHB mean to you, is trying to define through our filter, the conversation that we need to figure out about what do we as a body feel like we need to do, and what our soul is for this work, and then what do we want to seed or have go or preserve in a different format. Because if the PHB has no need to exist anymore, because the HSC is going to do all the work, then that's one thing to consider. But we are proud of our board. We do a lot of work. We bring diverse groups, and we're looking at different structures on how it should go. And so pretty much my take from this, as one of the 3 leaders at the table from the PHB, is that we were supposed to talk to y'all today and get your understanding about what does this feel like? Do you see one preserving what we feel like we should be doing? And then we can take that back. I was actually opposed to the deep dive and the survey happening in the timeline it was, because of the fact that I felt we needed to have at least 2 meetings like this where we as a body understand who we are, but I was not consulted on the timeline.
Brittany, can I jump in one more time?
Yeah, go for it.
So I guess I would answer my own question about what is the problem we're trying to solve, which is we have a regional problem and we have 2 different agencies that are addressing a regional problem through different means. From the city of Eugene's perspective, my concern that you have heard me say for a couple of years now is, where does Eugene fit into this structure in terms of both in terms of our authority to help make policy decisions, and also in terms of sort of our work being reflected in this larger work, or the way in which we collaborate with the county. So when I look at these, it's hard for me to understand which of these options would put the city's work in the kind of in the right framework, where I felt like we're a player at the policy level, and we're also a player at the implementation level, and how is that reflected in this structure? I can't quite tease that out from these descriptions, but that's my concern is, how are we defining that sort of coordination and relationship through these 2 different bodies?
And I guess I'll add that just to the question of what are the challenges that we're looking to solve is from the conversations that occurred initially, the key opportunities that arose are really around the decision-making framework, around, firstly, meeting the external requirements, and that there's many, and then also looking to achieve greater sustainability and coordination and collaboration with, entities that are partnering to address, both the mammoth challenges of, poverty and houselessness. Also really focusing on the stated goals, and that, we hear over and over again the need for a longer term strategic plan. And so what sets us up, most effectively to be able to create something like that not only is kind of meeting the needs of those at the table, but also results in kind of that broader buy-in that we hear doesn't exist today. And then also just the operational efficiency, and that, all pieces of a system, cost dollars. And so how do we do that in the most efficient way, and systemically focused way, so that people aren't doing the same thing, and that the same conversations aren't happening in multiple groups.
Thanks, Kate. I had Mayor Van Gordon and then Commissioner Farr.
All right, so I've got a lot of opinions here. I don't think anybody's got a handle on the implementation piece about this. I feel like I've said this a couple of times. and like just hearing how we get from A to B, inherently, I'm still remaining about the concern, like the process that goes from the chairs make a recommendation from to the board, seems inherently flawed to me. And I think there's two reasons here. One of them is you can't put the county commission in that, like, I'm not going to speak for Pat here, but I'm going to speak for my experience on how, when my council interacts with other folks, is that when you sort of run this thing too tight and you bring one option to the table, the county commission is the ultimate decision maker here. This is an advisory board to the county commission. And if we got to one thing, right, I would be concerned that we were not leaving enough room to really take their advice and consent in direction here. And that it could just sort of, and I'd be interested to hear Pat's take on this, but like if it all is driven by the board chairs and it gets to one solution, we don't really give them a place for that conversation to breathe, if that makes sense. The second thing I think that's really important here is there's other bodies that are involved with the HSC, right? And in no way have I seen this presentation come out where you're actively engaging the other political and policy bodies that are involved in this. And it's not going to work until you do that. Because the city of Springfield's a member of the HSC. And when you describe how you get to the implementation phase of this, there's no description to come back to my policymaking body and Lucy's policymaking body to get further direction about that. So I'm just more curious about how you guys see that happening.
I'll say, I think the intention is that those involved in the HSC from the decision-making bodies would bring those back, and certainly hear your feedback in that it may not be the best path forward, or that may not be the ideal way of doing that.
My understanding, and if I'm talking to, like, my city manager and assistant city manager know nothing about this at all, right? Like, and I would be curious more about what you guys see as like bring back means, because normally, at least in the city of Springfield, bring back would mean for this kind of thing, I'm assuming would mean an actual vote to do it. Like, we actually should have a say at the table since we put money into the HSC.
I appreciate the feedback very much.
So I don't know, and I'm not trying to be a jerk here, right? But I think from a process perspective, and I've made about a ton of calls about this thing has not got, people don't have a handle about, like, hey, even if we get to the right answer, how do we actually engage the elected officials in a way to create something that's palatable to all the jurisdictions involved, and give those elected officials the right, the opinion, and the ability to actually have an opinion and a lively discussion about it. I feel like I've said this a couple of times the last couple of months. We don't have a handle on this. So I just want to make sure we're clear on this, right? Like, from an HSC perspective, the people that and I got two great representatives on HSC. They do a great job, right? But like, is the county's understanding that those folks have the power to speak for the actual body? Does that make sense? Like, there's some stuff that actually has to come back to the actual council to vote on, right? They don't have, I guess, unilateral power over everything, sort of decision-making power in that setting for the city of Springfield.
This is Lucy speaking. Sean, I just want to thank you for those comments, because I do think this is the challenging piece for this, is that our city councilor is not authorized by the city council as a whole to make this decision, and hasn't had an opportunity even really sort of to share this question with the rest of councilors, so they don't know. So I do think, Sean, this is a big problem. And I think for us, to go back to the beginning, for us, it is, what is the role of cities in this process and going forward in these two boards? And it has been very challenging to figure out where we are with respect to county policies if cities are sitting on an interjurisdictional board, but in fact, all jurisdictions are not created equal, because the county is actually the lead jurisdiction. So that, I think that's where it gets very hard. And you're the lead jurisdiction because both of those federal requirements require that, right?
Yes.
Both the policy side of the HSC and the implementation side of the PHB require.
I'll add more when it's my turn in the queue.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Pat. Sorry, I'm rambling because I have the whole room here.
Well, I'll state this. This is by far the best conversation we've had to date, and in no small part because the mayors of Eugene and the mayor of Eugene and the mayor of Springfield are here, and you can speak authoritatively for your boards while you can't make decisions for them in this meeting. Now, that being said, I spent 10 years as a Eugene City Councilor on the HSC. And until recently, I spent 10 years as a county commissioner on the HSC. Historically, the HSC was a board that really did mutually come to decisions and take them back to the separate jurisdictions for more or less ratification. There's a small amount of money that was involved, less than $5 million. Isn't that crazy we call that a small amount of money? But that is a relatively small amount of money. But to me, the big question is the one that both mayors are raising right now. What is the city's role in this entire structure? And I don't just mean the city of Eugene and Springfield. I mean the 16 cities in Lane County, and how does that mesh with the overall role of the county? Well, you stated the county does have the responsibility in our model for the CFC and for the CAA, but also the county is the Board of Health. And we do have the Human Services Division, and no other jurisdiction has that. So because of that, it seems, whether I were a city councilor or as a county commissioner, that the county is the appropriate place for this to be umbrellaed. However, in Lane County, we all know, it's not even an elephant in the room, this is the fact, the city of Eugene has a tremendous engine in generating both grant money and other resources to address the problem, not just this problem, but many other problems, but most certainly the one surrounding homelessness. And it is where the lion's share of the work has always been done on homelessness, has been with the city of Eugene, by size, by nature, and by sheer hitting power. So Mayor Vinish, your question is, what are the two what are we trying to solve here? And to me, we're trying to solve the issue of that every 2 or 3 years, somebody says, hey, we need a board to handle this issue. Well, to me, this has got to be the board that handles the issues surrounding homelessness in terms of the tripartite element, which is government, private, and nonprofit. And it's also in terms of the multi-jurisdictional, which is the cities and the county. So the question is, how do we get to the point where the cities feel empowered and that the decision-making that happens here at this board really is unilaterally applicable, and that it's something that really does apply to everybody who's sitting at the big table? I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we came very, very close in the prime years of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And you hear me quite often talk about Operation 365, which is a very successful program that had very, very strong results. So back to Mayor Vince's question that we're kind of trying to hash through, how do we make this poignant, or how do we make it salient better for the cities and the county at the same time? I think the discussion's ongoing, because as a county commissioner, I don't want the responsibility to lay on the Board of County Commissioners to tell the city of Eugene and Springfield what to do. That's not, or to have them think, well, we better tread carefully because the county commission has to approve what we want to do. Well, that's not a healthy situation, because you're the engines and we are more or less the vehicle that you're driving. So the conversation is good. And Kate, I think you're moving in the right direction. I think we've taken it in the right direction, but let's continue the conversation.
No.
Yeah.
Brittany, can I just jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say less that we are the engines, Pat, than we are the emergency room. And I think the funds that we've been able to use recently are one-time funds. So the city does not, in fact, have a big ongoing budget to do this work. And that's why the effectiveness of these oversight bodies headed by the county are so critically important to us, because we cannot sustain the work that we have done the last couple of years. We don't have a clear pathway to sustaining that work. And so that's a kind of a policy question around who does what piece of this work and how is that funded. So I think it's really important to recognize that we're shouldering a challenge in the city of Eugene, because we have to shoulder that challenge, but we would love to find this as a process that would enable us to actually have a kind of a clearer and and sustainable and productive partnership where it's not landing on the city's shoulders with one-time funds.
And Mayor Vinnis, I think you added to the conversation significantly by stating that, the county does receive a lot of latitude in that. Let's take the Bridges on Broadway, which is the old Red Lion that's now being converted to our permanent supportive housing. It's done through Homes for Good. Homes for Good is a developer. Homes for Good are the ones that are doing the work, but the county facilitated that happening. The city was involved. The city of Eugene was involved because it's inside the city of Eugene, and I think that was a process that went pretty well. What I dreamed about with the discussion that we're having right now is that ultimately we'd have a board that has the breadth of membership that the Poverty and Homelessness Board has, but the strength of an intergovernmental board that the Human Services Commission has. Poverty and Homelessness Board doesn't report to anybody other than the Board of County Commissioners. The Human Services Commission is funded by the three jurisdictions, and therefore has a responsibility to the three jurisdictions. So I'd love to see a hybrid of that in one of these boards, but I don't necessarily want to see both boards go away. Mayor Van Vinnis, you're flaunching.
And Pat,
Mayor Van Vinnis.
that's kind of what I was expecting to see out of like a version that described that out of the consultant. I know we're only seeing the higher level piece to it, so I'm assuming that there's more detail here than this. But that ultimately, like, outside of that sort of governance and how you move efficiently, and I've got lots of opinions about things that are in the details that are in there, but that's the part that I felt like was missing out of the presentation, is that sort of option that we've talked about for use.
Yeah, thanks. I want to get Chris in the queue here. He's been waiting. Go ahead, Chris. Hey, Chris, are you able to unmute? Looks like you're still muted. There we go.
And the hot phones. I support whatever it takes to move the work forward for our communities. We have Eugene as this county seat where all of our services seem to be anchored. We have Springfield, who relies on Eugene and the county to cover its homeless services. We used to have committees that could advise the PHB to do a lot of the work that it needed to, especially with shelter, with outreach and things of that. We've had to close those down and not been able to restore them. And so our own mechanisms to advise the Board of County Commissioners have been closed down internally. So if we are to move on to whatever we are, I think that we really need to look at the people around the table or who are not around the table right now, because of the fact that we have changed things so much. And so if we want to build forward, then we need to figure out what is worth preserving. So option B, 1 or 2, option 3 or 4, it's like, how do we actually get the work done? Because ultimately, we can all feel handcuffed, we can all feel frustrated, or we can feel hopeful. But the people who are on the streets and the people who are at risk of losing their housing, who've seen us work for the last 3 years and not seen the same goals that we've had in 2018, 2019, this is where it comes to the pavement. And so I'm proud of this work. I'm proud of everybody who takes the time to go to these meetings. And one of my biggest concerns was every time we put something forward for the PHB agenda, it would be pulled off and then put in at the HSC agenda. or we get the same information at both meetings all the time. So whatever we move forward, whatever discussion we have, may we stop with the redundancy, may we restore lived experience and advisory capacity to the PHB and allow our vehicles to actually have bandwidth across all of Lane County. I yield.
So I just want to share, I appreciate the conversation and particularly the feedback from our elected officials. I hear that those representing jurisdictions at the HSC are not able to make kind of unilateral decisions on behalf of those jurisdictions, and appreciate understanding that much more clearly now. I am one of many who is working on this process, and so I will absolutely bring this feedback and continue kind of sharing what it is that was discussed today so that we can improve the overall process. I think I appreciate your point, Chris. I think we all have the same interest. I mean, we are here because we care deeply about the people in our community, and that we recognize, there are always ways to do better. And that includes in our group structures, and in the policies that we have in our community. And so I just appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts, and please don't hold back in the survey either. Share what is on your mind, and that will help, also inform how we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I guess I want to make sure that I recognize time is short here, but this is the first time that I felt like we've actually got to have a discussion about it. And I don't know if there's an opportunity for you to go back and work with and talk to the folks who are sort of dictating the process, because I fear that I don't know that we got to the bottom of how to incorporate this feedback in the next steps and moving this forward. So I guess that would be my hope, is if we're wrapping up conversation now, that we have some idea of how we're going to change the process or incorporate more feedback before we move to a decision. Because I do feel like, there's a little bit of form follows function, and I think we're trying to understand, like, what are we trying to do here before we decide to support the structure or the structure that supports it. And so I just want to make sure that level of discussion is able to be had to the extent that it will get us to the right answer.
So what I predict, and again, it is not my decision, is the survey will go out. And it's simply another opportunity to hear feedback, just like today, and in other spaces. And that will be a piece of the information that is brought to the chairs of the HSC and the PHB. I have heard loud and clear that that is not the step to get to a decision in a short period of time. That there's a lot of other things. I'm hearing more conversations. I'm hearing more information to our partner jurisdictions. I'm hearing opportunities to suss out the options even further. And then, more conversations in the Poverty and Homelessness Board, and I assume at the HSC as well. And what those tell me is we're not in a position to push to a decision by the time our consultants are done, which I think has been our motivation on the timeline that we've been working toward thus far. And so I will bring that back very clearly, and I'm happy to provide an update once what the next steps look like. And we'll probably, we'll bring draft to the HSC chairs and see if that's something that they can agree on, as well as the feedback from this meeting and others. And then I'll be able to share it with this group. And then we can have another conversation with the Poverty and Homeless Board as well.
Brittany, can I also just jump into? So
yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would just say one other thing, which I think would be true, is very true for me, and I know it's true for Councilor Keating serving on the HSC, which is that our staff actually understand the implications of this better than we do as electeds. And so I would like to make sure that the staff get to weigh in a fairly in-depth way and that there's maybe, I mean, I do this sort of naturally schedule this time with staff, but make sure that that's sort of that for the other jurisdictions, there's also that opportunity to say, how does this work for you operationally, right? And what is your perception? Because I think the staff are the ones who are doing this work day to day. Electeds, we can have a lot of opinions, but I'd like to see that input in there.
Maybe
Yeah,
that's the
excellent.
solution. Just take the electeds out of this and let the staff do it.
Hey, it's a bunch of opinions, not just a lot of opinions.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. Did you have one last closing comment there?
Yeah, so I guess I would recommend something similar to Mayor Dennis, is that I would go back either through the staffs or try to set up a briefing with the city managers and ask them to guide you through this, right? Because they are going to be able to tell you how, like, what actually needs to be done on each side, and understanding that out of the 3 jurisdictions, it could be 3 completely different processes. But, you know, one of the big red flags I hear is nobody in the city manager's office in Springfield understands what's going on, right? Like, and that would be the single point that would be able to help guide you on the roadmap of, okay, I am here, and if we get to an answer, how do we get it implemented?
Thank you. I hear you.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Okay. I feel like this conversation was needed, so gave it a little bit more time, but that means our agenda is a little bit off. So, Kate, I might look to you to find out, is there something we should cut? I don't know if the HMIS policies conversation is time sensitive. We could cut down jurisdictional updates just a tad, or if we want to add 10 minutes to the meeting.
You know, I'm happy. I can go very quickly through all in.
Okay.
I imagine you probably can cut it down to 10.
And also email. Like we can send out informational stuff from us.
So maybe if myself and Carly, then whatever time we have for jurisdictional updates, then we should be good.
That sounds great. Let's go for it.
So regarding all in, we continue to move forward with enacting the plan that was approved through the state. There is a request for proposal that is open today through Lane County for the program specific action items that were within the all-in plan. And so particularly if you're a provider and you haven't taken a look at it, I highly encourage you to. The applications are due on Monday, the 22nd, so this coming Monday at 12 noon. If you have questions about the RFP, please email Patrick Kerr, who's the primary contact, and those questions will be answered through the addendums on that RFP page. We also had a conversation at the MAC group yesterday regarding kind of what happens if we don't get all the proposals that we would hope for, so that we're not able to map out the plan as thoroughly as we would hope. And so the MAC group identified, there's some program aspects where, we can fold it into another, and then others where we want to hold true to specific action items to make sure that they do happen during the all-in efforts. And then lastly, we hope to have the new programs up and running by early July at the very latest. We're going to be negotiating contracts in June. And then there'll be opportunities to kind of just share, once the contract is executed, we'll share who's gotten dollars and who is working on what type of programming. The other thing we talked about is around addressing encampments. There are specific systemic focus areas within the all-in plan around creating a pilot with one core outreach team that focuses on providing housing focused street outreach to one encampment at a time. And so there was a robust conversation yesterday about what does that encampment coordination look like, and how can we make sure that the needed players at the table are there. And that work will be coordinated through coordinated entry and the case conferencing work that's already happening with our fantastic outreach teams across the county. So we have much to learn around this focused encampment efforts. It's new for our community, but one that has worked well for others. And so as we learn more, we'll be able to apply it to future encampments. The key thing with this effort is just making sure that when an encampment is focused upon, that it also not be subject to being disrupted. And so as you can imagine, there's conversations that need to happen to help ensure that as well. So lots of great work. Excited to take a look at the presentation through the RFP, and then we'll be able to share who was recipients of the all-in dollars, likely end of June, beginning of July. And then I'll pass it to Carly.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay, so I have two small things and I'm going to try to multitask, so that's going to be fun. One item is that in the next meeting, we're hoping to vote on some changes to the policies and procedures for HMIS. And these are really minor updates that I will just email the track changes document so you can see and spend time on. One is we're updating the contact information to be the right phone number. Two is we're going to add just a procedural explanation of how we calculate inventory. It's a question I get a lot, and we actually don't have any leeway. HUD tells us what to do, but I think it's nice to have it in there. So I have a table that explains why rapid rehousing looks one way versus permanent supportive housing another way. And then the third change, and this is one I'm happy to discuss either now or next meeting, but I would like to extend the data timeliness requirement. So in 2021, we shortened the data timeliness requirement. So all agencies are supposed to enter information within 24 hours of the event happening. And that is a best practice and certainly recommended, and just, it's not realistic. For shelters, I'd like to keep it at 24 hours just because that utilization is so important, knowing that it's not always going to happen. And then for everything else, we'd want to extend it to 48 hours. The reason we can't go any more, we used to be at 72. Reason we can't go any longer than 48 is because the state, which funds a lot of our programs, is coming out with new manuals in July, and their new requirement is 48 hours. So I'd like to expand it as much as we can, knowing that it's still not that much of a grace period, but what can we do, given funding restrictions and things like that. So those are the three updates for policies and procedures. I'll send the document out, and we're not voting today. That would be at the next meeting. So thank you. That's my first one. My second one is, I have it open on both computers, just wanted to get feedback on this idea for a new question we're proposing to add to all of basically every HMIS intake form starting in July, which is when a lot of folks report for, they get asked these questions again, essentially. And I've put them like directly into the document so you can see this. But number one question I get asked, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, is we have such a problem and where is it coming from? We used to ask a question about zip code of last permanent address. So usually when I get asked this, I get asked for those zip codes. We stopped using them a long time ago because they weren't being updated. Number one feedback that we have heard from folks who do data entry is, I asked that question and someone told me San Francisco and didn't have a zip code, and I had to stop all my work, move over, look it up, and that's just not realistic. So the zip codes were just not getting updated. So I'd rather not do that. Instead, we talked to agencies about this a couple months ago and kind of workshopped some wording for just a local question. And, if you've never seen this intake form before, really fun to see, I'd say. One of the things we ask everyone and are required to is, where did you stay last night? So where were you sleeping? Are you homeless or not? If you slept in a place not meant for habitation or shelter, that means you're considered to be literally homeless. And if that's the case, we're proposing adding just one additional question, which comes way down here, which is, what city were you living in when you lost your housing?
Oh, that's excellent.
On the paper form, it's just a fill-in box. If you enter directly into the system, here's a screenshot of what it would look like. It's this picture right here in the middle. If literally homeless, what city were you living in? These are my proposed options for a drop down, which are, city options. I'm happy to take some feedback. If we can not make it too much longer, that'd be my preference. And then based on these cities and then other Lane County, there'll be an other city question down here. Other Oregon, they can fill out that other, and then outside of Oregon. So this will let us see if we're getting a lot of folks from a certain area, we could certainly change this drop-down menu later and add more options. But this seemed like maybe a good starting point, and I wanted to get feedback on this.
I think it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you also ask a question, do you ask a question, how long, somewhere in that form, you're also
Yes.
asking how long. So
Yeah.
if they just lost their housing in Eugene, but they've only been in Eugene for
Yes.
3 weeks.
Yeah. So we'll be able to do some calculations. We won't be able to do everything, but that would require, like, you showed up to the food pantry, let's have a 30-minute conversation about how you got here.
Yeah.
And that's not always realistic.
Right.
So trying to make this as minimal as possible, but helping us answer those questions, which I get a lot. And quite frankly, I just can't make assumptions on right now. So I think this would help us get a lot closer. Given that it's a local question, it's not based on any HUD guidelines, we can change it in a week. We have a lot of flexibility around whether this is exactly getting us what we need to know.
So I just have another, sorry, Brittany, I'm just jumping in because I have total control over this situation. I'm not depending on you to let me talk. Up at the top of that form, there were 3 options about where they had this one.
Yes.
Place not, do we even have a safe haven location anymore?
But we're required to put it in there because this is a HUD standard question and I can't change any of the options.
Okay.
We do guide people and let them know this isn't an option. And,
okay.
But in other parts of Oregon, it actually is. There's a few safe haven projects still out there. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Farr.
Thanks, Brittany. Just really quickly, can you swing down to the drop-down menu for where you're from?
Yeah.
What was the city? And we just include outside Oregon. And is there any place to fill out which city outside Oregon, or is that not our business?
Yes. So they could certainly put that in. I'm curious to see how accurate that will be. For example, like I know there's a Springfield in pretty much every state in the country. So, may or may not be helpful, or, I'm from Pittsburgh and there's tons of those. But this other city could be for any of those options.
Oh, there is. Got it. Okay. For any of those options outside Oregon, fill out other question below. Then I love the question, what city were you living in when you lost your housing?
Yes.
I think that is a cut to the quick question right there. And, it's not ambiguous at all, which I'm afraid that some of the questions we've asked in the past have given people an opportunity to kind of be a little bit, not hedgy or shady, but non-specific about where they actually came from. Because we all know this, and are you listening? We all know that Boise gives people bus tickets to Eugene, right? Haha, I'm just kidding. But that's the kind of anecdotal information we get if we don't have very specific information as to where people are coming from. So I love this. I think it's fantastic, Carly.
I can't take credit for this question. I took a very different question to the agencies at an HMIS agency admin meeting, and they hated it and gave me this one. So
I'm going to give it to you. It's your
feedback.
question from now on, Carly. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Looks like Chris is in the queue. Chris.
I appreciate the work you're doing with this, especially with that question, Carly. I'm interested in also gauging to Commissioner Farr's point, not only where people were losing their housing, but where were people made to be to live, because we have some places like Springfield where we have G Street Oasis requires you to have ties to Springfield. We have Cottage Grove Camp, which is required to be a Grover from a certain point before. And so I think where you're born and where you lost your housing could also tell us a story as we look at development and whatnot. And so without them being exclusionary. So if we could add anything, I'd like to say, where were you born? And this question, just so we can keep it close together. Or where did you grow up? Some people are also just waiting for something else to happen where they're from so that they have an opportunity to come back. But this is great work. And I would like to ask, do we have any legislative or state representation that we can ask so we can get our criteria, our needs to go? So if we need to do 72-hour and 48 is onerous and we have a reason why, who do we get to make our case to?
That is a state of Oregon Housing and Community Services question. So they are the ones who are tightening up those data timeliness requirements. And my assumption is to try to get closer to aligning with HUD's requirement or strong suggestion that we do direct data entry. And if we can't do direct, let's do 24 hours. So that's where I'm hearing that from in general. More and more, I think we're seeing communities move to direct data entry, and a lot of funding will support paying for hotspots and computers and other items to allow for that. So that's where I'm.
Give me, Chair, quick one. I need to transition to my other meeting. I apologize for leaving.
One other thing I will say is we already asked current residents, so we can certainly compare where you lost your housing versus where you are now. Absolutely, if you're in a rural area, there might not be any services for you. It's not a surprise. You know, Chris has talked to me about the small areas right outside of Cottage Grove. You could just walk there. Right. Or I can walk to Eugene from my house in Springfield. So, you know, we can compare those and do some interesting things. And my hope too is we can run some reports on this question specifically and give that back to the agencies, because I know they get asked this question a lot too and would like to be able to dispel some myths. Oh, for people who come to our agency, it's, you know, 90% of people lost their housing in Lincoln County. That's information we could get once we start asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure. All right, let me stop sharing.
So looking at the time here, we're running up on 1:30, and the piece that we had left was the jurisdictional update. So I'm open if folks have anything burning that is time sensitive and they want to share, but otherwise we have a similar piece in the all member meeting as well. So
we can wait.
Okay, excellent. You can see in the agenda that the agenda for the it says April, but I think we mean June. All member meeting. So we'll do another all-in update. Gonna talk a little bit about equity, representation, and then Unite Us is gonna have a presentation as well. HIC and PIT from Carly and the COC application debrief. So lots packed into the next all member meeting, and if folks need anything between now and then, Kate's your gal, like I said. Kate, I just want to say that I appreciate you, and I know that you have a lot of plates that you're trying to keep spinning at the same time with this PHP, HSC, and the all-in work and all the other things. So I can feel the overwhelm and frustration sometimes whenever things go a little bit sideways with feedback, but I just appreciate you're always so open and willing to pivot and adjust. So just want to appreciate you and your staff, of course.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Same to you and all involved.
And I want to second that. I really appreciate your being open to all of those questions. I know it's hard. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Adieu all.
Thanks.